This video will be composed of an introduction and overview of the 161 crew and a discussion with Nestor, who is a member of the 161 crew. The 161 crew is an anti-fascist project based in Poland. It operates as an umbrella organization composed of multiple activist projects. According to the 161 crew, their adventure began 8 years ago. At the time, they didn't really know where it was going. The original idea was to promote anti-fascism, and in this case, it was through a website. That website quickly turned into the largest information medium in the country, being Poland, focusing on the situation of anti-fascists from around the world and promoting street culture among anti-fascists. Since the middle of 2012, the 161 crew have been running their website, making merch and stickers, organizing the 161 Fest, and publishing the Alerta zine. And so here's the 161 crew website translated from Polish to English. You can see that the website covers a whole lot of information ranging from news, journalism, culture, sports, roll call of the fallen, shop, Pulaski. We're going to look at some of these examples to kind of give you background into what this group is all about. And we can see in the news section, this is not just regional. They're talking about things happening in France, of course, Belarus and Poland, the Wagner Group, Colorado Springs, talking about murderous attack on LGBT plus club. So covering lots of ground. On their front page, I believe they actually have an article about, Atlanta right now. So Atlanta, USA, state repression against anti-police activists. In the journalism section, these pieces are a bit more in depth. We have something about what's happening in Armenia in 2023, an interview with the Belarusian anarchist fighting in Ukraine, an article about Charlottesville. So some of these things should look familiar to Western anti-fascists, but some of them, maybe like the interview with the Belarusian anarchist fighting in Ukraine, might be new information. The roll call of the fallen section is interesting to me because it is a broad global view of victims of fascism. And it's just something, it isn't that this doesn't exist elsewhere. It's just interesting seeing it from an Eastern European perspective, I suppose. So for instance, we see Dmitry Petrov, this Russian anarchist, right next to Heather Heyer. And I think that this is, in my mind, how things should be. But it's not always how they are. Their distro is on Facebook, and so you can look at the merchandise that they have and message and discuss pricing. I've bought some things from them already. They have a lot of great shirts and hats and things like that, but their records are really great. They have, apparently bands will donate records to them, and they have some great hardcore metal and punk albums from going back to the 90s, but the 2000s and even current. However, all of that's really cool. But if you're going to visit the website, the one part that you need to go to is the Russian reader section. And we can see this is like an English version, Russian invasion of Ukraine reader. I would love to read all of this to you, but you can go to the site and read it. And a lot of it is going to be what Nestor and I talk about anyway. But underneath their introduction, where they talk about things like NATO and the US and imperialism from Russia and Russian propaganda, there are just a series of articles that talk about what's happening in Ukraine from an anti-fascist anarchist perspective, and also an Eastern European perspective as well. And this is so invaluable because as we'll talk about, I do talk about this with Nestor, but this voice is just lacking in the West. It's lacking in Western media, including alternative media, including what you see on social media. And it just is, to me, makes no sense. To me, these should be the voices who are centered in a broad left discussion, whatever that might be and how you self-identify. But generally speaking, from a left perspective, these are the voices who should be leading and guiding that conversation. And they're just largely missing in the West. And I think that needs to be corrected. So this is where if you're going to come here, look at the records. They're awesome. Look at some of the artwork and some of the articles. Some of these articles are really great. But when you're done with that, be sure you save time to get to the Russian Reader and check out some of the things listed below. So now that you have a broad general introduction idea of what the 161 crew is all about, let's transition to that discussion I had with Nestor. Now we have a introductory idea of what the 161 crew is all about. So let's transition now to the discussion that I had with Nestor. Okay, so I have Nestor, and Nestor, first, I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself, your background, and what folks should know.
Hi, I'm Nestor. I'm involved in militant anti-fascism and anarchism in Poland and elsewhere for a long time. Best part of 25 years now, and mainly active these days as a part of 161 crew. Yeah, that's that.
Yeah, so I reached out to you after having come across an article about the 161 crew, and you're not speaking on behalf of that organization or anything today, but you are, knowledgeable about it, as well as other anarchist, anti-fascist groups. As you said, you've been at this for a while, but I didn't really understand at first what the 161 crew was, and until I got on the site and I read about it. I wasn't sure if it was just a journalist organization or whether it was a group of direct action or what have you. So could you provide like an unofficial overview of kind of what the 161 crew is all about?
Yeah, sure. So 161 Crew is a project that was founded in Poland in 2012, and it's sort of loose network of like-minded activists, often also with bonds of friendship, but not always. And yeah, it's not a formal organization. It's more of a network, more of an umbrella for different activists and smaller activist projects. But it's united by anti-fascism, by kind of class struggle approach to anti-fascism. So not a liberal kind. Majority of us in 161 crew are anarchists, but not all of us are. There are also people on the kind of wide spectrum of anti-authoritarian left. With a big distinction is that we do not have people within our group that consider themselves part of like authoritarian left. So like Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, and this kind of stuff, because we have zero interest in working with these people. Yeah, that I think would be like a general description, and aim of 161 crew is, I don't know, you could kind of say we kind of like a anti-authoritarian left think tank, or we're trying to be in Poland. We are a mixture of activist project and a journalist organization, and also aiming to materially support different initiatives within the movement that we find valuable.
Yeah. And we might as well jump, because we might as well jump to a question I had that was going to be a little bit later, but you brought it up. In the West, or at least in the US, I should say, we talked about this a little bit before we got on. It feels like there can be a struggle to describe the types of folks that you were just describing, basically. And they can be come off as being maybe conspiratorial or pro-Russian on social media, but portraying themselves as being from the left. Sometimes tankies, is a term that's used. It's kind of derogatory, but and generalized though. But so you were pretty specific when you said authoritarian left, but could you just like expand on that a little bit more? You gave some examples like Maoist, and for example, but what's the authoritarian left? Because I think it's a good term, as opposed to some others I've heard.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, as I mentioned already, majority of us are anarchists or kind of anarchist adjacent, and for us, authoritarian left are, as I said, Marxist Leninists definitely fall within that purview. Maoists, Stalinists, all kinds of people like that that essentially would stand in contradiction, stand against what we believe in, and people that under the label of being leftists would praise dictators, don't find anything wrong with genocide and mass murder as long as it's committed in the name of the right cause, and things like that. So yeah, all these ideologies that I mentioned definitely fall within that spectrum, and we make a distinction obviously from people. We don't describe ourselves as anti-communist, for example, because communism is a very broad term, and some of us are anarcho-communists as well, and some of us are, you got all these trends within the movement. They're like council communism and the libertarian communism and this communism, that communism. So we definitely don't want to describe ourselves as anti-communists, despite the fact that some people called us that, because it's a very right-wing approach, and we want to stay away from that.
Yeah.
And we're proudly left-wing. We never hid that. But yeah, in a less political theory way to describe it, but more a real life description, is like what authoritarian left are the people that would love to put us in gulags if we disagree with them on this or that matter, and people that in the history of anarchism and anti-fascism proved over and over again that they're very happy to put us against the wall once we did our job, so to speak. And these are not just examples from the history. These are also examples from more modern life of quite like few of us worked in different projects, especially when living abroad with like authoritarian communists in groups, and nothing good ever came out of that. So yeah.
I mean, it can be pretty basic. It doesn't need to be politically ideological. I think you're right. When folks start talking about quotas or start justifying existing authoritarian regimes because of A, B, or C, that's kind of where the conversation stops, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone with a weak spot for USSR and China and all stuff like that.
That's interesting. I want to talk about that later. Because
yeah, sure.
It's interesting, from a perspective of Eastern Europe versus the United States, and how those views are different. But before we get to that, and I think this would be good for people listening actually, but since a lot of the videos I've made recently have focused on Ukraine, and I think that Russian reader portion of the 161 Crew site it's a great source. When you first go into it, it states, as the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues to take its brutal toll on this country's population and infrastructure, there still seem to be a lot of confusion, especially in the West, about who is the aggressor and whether such a blatant act of imperialism is actually imperialism. And I think that that was very well said. It kind of gets right to the heart of it. And again, I spend a lot of time on these topics. So I'd like to ask you, and this is going to kind of go to what we were just talking about, why, particularly in the West, is there such confusion over what should be a pretty clear scenario regarding, Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Where does this confusion come from? Why are we asking, is this imperialism?
I, I think it comes from campism, and it's kind of it's a bit of a residue of the Cold War, you know, like
Yeah, I do too.
when you live in the West, very often in the imperial core, in the heart of the beast, so to speak, I think you tend to start seeing anything that is against the USA or the Western imperialism as some sort of like initially maybe less bad, and then with time you might even start seeing it as actually good. And also there is definitely a lot of nostalgia towards USSR amongst the portion of Western leftists, which then transforms into what they think about Russia, because they think these two are really connected, and to a large degree they are, you know, to a large degree they are, because modern Russia uses a lot of myths and a lot of kind of histories created during the time of USSR, and they pick and choose anytime they like something, and they pick it up and use it in their own kind of, you know, propaganda, and in their own way of doing things. So I think partially there is like a nostalgia towards Russia, and people somehow can't imagine that Russia can be imperialist, even though it never stopped being imperialist. Even, you know, even amongst historians, it's fairly uncontroversial idea that USSR was also an imperialist country, just following from imperialist Russia, just with a different hat on, and a different color of the banner. So I think that explains it partially. To a smaller extent, it's also I think an influence of Russian propaganda, subtle influence of Russian propaganda on people. That, you know, a lot of that propaganda is aimed at kind of left-leaning circles, because they are vulnerable to this kind of propaganda. And it seeps in as well. But as I said, I would say that propaganda, Russian propaganda, is more of a smaller factor here, perhaps. I think mainly it's yeah, what I just said.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I largely agree. I had a similar conversation recently about it. Um, yeah, it's interesting because, you know, from there's a few different parts to that, but I do think that there is something kind of inherent in, especially the United States, about, just broadly speaking, left or left adjacent, not even necessarily anti-fascist or anarchist, just generally speaking, and in the broader spectrum, that um, there was so much propaganda, which is true, that was put out in the United States during the Cold War, um, kind of vilifying the Soviet Union, that yeah, it almost became a point of protest to question that U.S. propaganda from within the United States, you know, which is fine, and that's good. But I also think that there's for, you know, whatever reason, I won't speculate because it probably depends on the individual or the group, but that kind of led to what you were saying of almost this um, need to equivocate or dismiss or kind of refocus or take charge of the conversation when that criticism comes back of the Russian Federation, let's say, or even historically looking back on the Soviet Union. There's almost like a knee-jerk reaction of saying, well, yeah, but what about the United States, you know, or yeah, but what about this, or
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just interesting because, you know, it's not a new observation, but man, it seems to happen every time. And like you were saying, kind of from the heart of the beast, I can't help but think that, you know, when I see that happening, I just, what I see is someone kind of taking over the conversation, right? If
Yep.
someone from Poland, for instance, is talking about what's happening in Ukraine, and then you have someone from the United States who's just geographically and ideologically kind of very far from that region, try to say, well, yeah, but no, that's not what it is. It's actually NATO and the United States and the CIA, and it's this very like imperialistic mindset where even though what you're criticizing is the West, you're
Oh
still
man, don't get me started on
yeah,
that.
you're
Don't
still
get me started on
right.
that.
You're still yeah. I mean, to me, it's like you go to like an anti-racist meeting and you start explaining, oh no, that's not what racism is. Let me explain this to you, or sexism, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean the term westsplaining really
Yeah,
applies here,
yeah.
and it's it's infuriating. It's infuriating, and I really think it's like a lot of people, because they're campist, because they think it's like, oh well, if America is bad, then logically people that are against America are good. Um,
Very naive.
it's like they can't grasp the concept of multiple things uh, being bad at the same time. It's like, oh my god, this is really crazy. How about two things are bad? How about American and Russian imperialism are bad?
Yeah.
And you don't have to constantly compare them to each other, and you don't have to bring America. Like, not everything bad in the world is because of America. There are also bad things that are not because of America. And
Right.
that's not in any way diminishing what America is doing. So you just don't have to fucking bring America into conversation all the time. But it's
Western.
very American centric as well. That's another
Yeah.
thing. It's like American, and to a smaller extent also like British and Western in general, like exceptionalism. It's like people that start explaining things to you when you live in Eastern Europe, they just somehow cannot grasp the idea that world somewhere else is not centered around America or not centered around West. So yeah, they just think it's a central point every single fucking time. And yes, it's infuriating, as you can tell, probably.
That's good though. This is because that's what I want folks to hear. You know,
Mm.
um, I want, and it's great that it's coming from that perspective. I literally had that conversation earlier today. It's early in the morning where I'm at now, but yeah, a few hours ago I had the same conversation, and the person literally asked, well, yeah, both sides do bad stuff, but I mean, which one do you think is worse? And I mean, my answer is kind of like that's not how it works. I mean, there's not like you don't just measure out and say this side is worse, so we're going to forget about the other side. It's there seems to be a lack of which I find interesting too. Everything those conversations when they happen, to me, in my experience, it all of a sudden becomes this like geopolitical discussion, right?
Yep.
Which is about politicians and governments and things that don't I have no part of,
Yep.
and the people involved are totally it's not only like are they left out, because to me, someone says who's worse, I'm saying, well, it depends who you ask, who's getting the brunt of the force of whomever we're talking about, because that's who's going to be worse to them. But it's even worse because then in this like what westsplaining, I've even seen instances where these dissenting voices become part of the conspiracy. If you want to talk about Western chauvinism or Western centric, to where they're even dismissed, like, oh no, that that's CIA, or no, those people are working with this group, and that group's fascist and this and that.
Yep.
And it's amazing, but the very people that I would think you would have solidarity with can actually become like pawns in this narrative that again
Oh, absolutely,
refocuses
man.
on the
It
West, right?
Absolutely. Also the arrogance displayed in these views is just staggering. It's just absolutely staggering. And again, it's infuriating if you're from Eastern Europe and you hear that, and you're just being constantly reduced to this pawn of some bigger empires, and you essentially have nothing to say, and you don't have your own aspirations, and you don't have your own goals. All you're doing is just, waiting for a fucking CIA check to come to start protesting about things, because obviously, like, Ukrainians or Belarusians or Kazakhs or whoever else, they just can't protest on their own. They have to wait for CIA to give them a go ahead. So yeah, that's another that's another example of stuff being very like American centric. And that's not to say that, like, this is not me trying to downplay CIA trying to influence things, or some other Western actors trying to influence things. But there's one thing, people trying to influence things. There is another thing, people astroturfing things, right? And this is the distinction. Is like the going back to Ukraine and Maidan, for example, is constantly shown like, oh, there's some like higher ranking American politician, I don't know, giving food parcels or something during Maidan. Well, that must clearly mean that Maidan is completely sponsored by US government, and reality is far more complicated. And also there are constantly multiple actors trying to influence things. Whatever big event is happening in the world, doesn't matter where it is, there are always like some actors trying to influence things. That doesn't matter. That doesn't mean it's astroturfed and it's been just financed by the CIA and they made it happen, apart from the times when they did.
Oh, that's the reality. Well, and I'll say this about the folks I've spoken with from, whatever you want to say, the anti-authoritarian left or anarchists or anti-fascists from Europe. The one thing that does seem to be a theme is that just life is complicated, and
Yep.
yeah, and it doesn't help that the United States really did make all that propaganda, and it doesn't help that the United States really did do all that it did throughout the 70s and 80s and Central and South America. And these things happened, and it really, in the grand scheme of things, didn't help anyone to have people like John McCain on Maidan taking pictures of people. That didn't help
Oh,
the
absolutely didn't. No.
yeah, yeah. So those things are it's real, and unfortunately, it can, in a complicated world, that can be leveraged, to create narratives or conspiracy, which is very popular, because I think it provides easy answers for folks. I don't know.
Yeah, people love easy answers, man. That's part of the problem.
Right.
People just want things to be black and white, and as I said, I get it on a human level. I get it. Someone must be, people must be so traumatized from living in the US and being bombarded by this kind of Cold War style propaganda constantly. And I mean, when we look from Europe, when we look at the political life in like politics in USA, it's like, man, I don't know, it's like watching fucking Life on Mars sometimes. This is just like another planet. I mean, if you
It's like that
got
here
like,
too. Don't
I don't know,
worry.
6 to 7 million people thinking that Joe Biden is communist, and like, what the fuck do you
Yes.
say to that? Like,
It
as a
doesn't.
person from Europe, we're just like looking at it and going, "Oh my god, what's going on there?"
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't have to make sense. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I understand that people are kind of so traumatized by it that they just go like completely opposite, and just anything that is contrary to what USS says is going to be good. But yeah, that's
So, and I didn't ask you to think about this before, so this is off the cuff, but so that's the criticism, and that's something that, like, I came to and I felt very obvious about, but other people don't, and there's different reasons for it. So if that's not the way, right? And let's just say we're agreeing that's not really the way to look at things, like Ukraine, for instance, right? And we can use Ukraine if we want to, or not. We can just speak generally, but
no, Ukraine is great. It's a modern
yeah.
example. It's it's yeah.
So if that's not the way to look at it, then what's another way to view things, as opposed to viewing things, US versus Russia, just using Ukraine for a proxy war, right? What's another view of that?
Well, I think, as anarchists, anti-fascists, anti-authoritarian leftists, we should be mainly looking at the voices from the region in forming our opinions. That is not to say that we have to take everything uncritically and just copy one-to-one whatever some Ukrainian and Belarusian anarchists are saying, but we should be learning from them about the situation and to a lesser extent other Eastern European comrades because they live around. So I would say people from there definitely have much better idea what's happening, and there is actually plenty of political analysis available, how to see things. And as we mentioned before, it's a complicated situation, but it is a very clear case of imperialist aggression and people defending against that aggression. And now the people defending against that aggression come from all sorts of political backgrounds, all sorts of all sorts of political and other backgrounds, and they have different motivations to resist the aggression. But I think main one is people trying to survive, people trying not to be genocided, and they perhaps would like not to be bombed and not to have their homes destroyed. So I think that's a motivation that unites almost everyone there that is fighting. So yeah, that would be the way to look at it. And of course, again, as I mentioned before, it's a big conflict. Of course, there are different actors trying to influence it, but ultimately it is a weaker country defending itself against imperialist aggression by a large empire next to them. So
yeah, I think it just can be that basic of reality of who is invading whom, right? Right, upon whom are bombs falling, right?
Honestly, sometimes you just I'm just reading stuff on the internet. I said mainly coming from some sectors of the Western left, US left, or especially all the communist communist left, and you just go like, wow, guys, do you even know who invaded who? Because sometimes you just start thinking that it's like Ukraine that invaded Russia, So
right, yeah, and that's a big, it's interesting because I'd be curious to know kind of your thought on it, or if you see this equal in your part of Europe, whether it's Poland or wherever. But in right, really with it's social media, it's and before that it was maybe some infiltration in groups and zines and communications and stuff. But with social media, you really do have these contrarian, I think you would say, accounts where they're not ideological. Oftentimes they kind of they don't necessarily say what they're for, but they identify by what they're against. And what they're
yeah,
against is kind of a mixture of a bunch of stuff. And it can be
yeah,
populist, right-wing rhetoric. It can be populist left-wing rhetoric. It can be the war in Ukraine. It can be COVID vaccines and this whole mixture of stuff. But that really seems to be a big, perpetrator of this like misinformation, I suppose. And even, misinformation is almost like a thing where folks in the US might, they see that as something to protest too, even use of that term, because of course, there are political parties and stuff that have co-opted it for their own use, unfortunately. But I'm
yeah.
thinking about, let's like gray zone, for instance, is kind of a big one, but there's a lot of money in it. And it's just crazy because when I would like to say that this is mostly stuff that's on platforms like Twitter or Facebook, and I'd like to say that's just online. But you look at how many people are following them, even if a bunch of them aren't real people, they're bots, and the influence is just like insane, compared to actual grassroots organizations that are actually doing things in real life. And the platform that these organizations have are just so much larger. But do you see much of that, and we could say wherever you want to talk about in Europe, wherever you have an understanding of it, these kind of, I don't want to say Russian outfits, because they're kind of these independent things, but they definitely take like a RT style stance on things and mix them all up in other conspiracies.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of that happening, and it's coming both from the certain fringes of the left, but also like definitely a lot of it is coming from the far right direction. Some of it is definitely directly funded by Russia. They'll, sometimes it's actually pretty easy to trace the fact that, someone went to some meetings and trips to Moscow that are documented, and then suddenly, I
Yeah,
think that's the case with certain great journalists, so to speak,
right.
that suddenly you start you seeing certain narratives in the writing appearing after after they went to meeting here or meeting there, or people that pretend to be independent left-wingers, but they are on a payroll of Russia Today, and then you look at them, it's like, well, man, you work for like Russian state media, basically, officially. Right. But a lot of it is, of course, not directly influenced and directly financed. Well, influenced, yes, but not financed, not directly financed by Russia. But yeah, no, definitely see a lot of that, and a lot of it is also like a really good grift. Like, you don't have to be financed by Russian embassy to make money out of it. It's the same with all the conspiracy cults. All the stuff that was happening during the pandemic and so on, that, like, there are people that were making money on it as well. People are making serious money on spreading all sorts of crazy theories, and then publishing books and having websites, and selling merchandise. And if you're enterprising individual, and you're intelligent, you could make a lot of money.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously by now the niche has been kind of filled, and it's not as easy to get on the grift anymore. So people are trying to look for new things. But yeah, now it's definitely money to be made as well.
Yeah. It's something, I'm just curious about. It's just so prevalent in society here, but I suppose wherever the internet is, it's prevalent there as well. I don't know. But speaking of the internet, and back on the 161 crew site, going through that Russian reader section, there there was an observation I thought that was very realistic, and it was from from Anti, who we were talking about, and I spoke with him from reaching out to Autonomous Action, and so he kind of spoke on his own, but with knowledge of that group too, and past things that they had done going way back to 2012 in Russia, and so forth. But he basically stated in this article that the results of democracy in Ukraine have not been great since its independence in the 90s, but the alternative is worse, and the alternative is Putin's government. And I like the way that he puts it. He said that when we talked too. He said it's like KGB without the socialism, right? It's from a Crime Think article, but yeah, there's a lot of reality that I like in that, because I do see that as well in the West. People sometimes even championing some nationalism of Ukraine, which is okay if they want to, but it's the idea of that's not necessary in order to find solidarity with people trying to just live without bombs going off, right? But also the reality of this Putin government, and that you can criticize it without, in the United States, I would think, the idea would be without being brainwashed by US propaganda to think that it's just evil, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I don't know, in the 161 crew kind of site, and some of the articles, are there any kind of discussions about how to frame the government in Russia, or kind of frame what's been happening, maybe? Because the events now, and whether you want to say it's 2014 or 2022, aren't really out of nowhere. This has been building up for for a long time. So I don't know, how would we describe what's happening in Russia? What kind of government exists?
Oh my God, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what would be the best description, but to be honest, we don't really care for like exact labels that much. We are
yeah,
more focused on the fact of like what's happening at the moment and what are the consequences of that government and being in place. And you know, that giving it exact label and calling it, oh, is it fascism, is it this, is it that, is it you know, whatever, it's not that useful for us, and it's not that much of a concern, as that I think I would say. And yeah, there probably would be some differences within 161 crew how to call it exactly. So yeah, but
yeah.
we don't really focus on giving it exact label. Whatever it is, it's really bad.
I like that. Yeah, and you know, because they're yeah, when you
We call it the Russian Empire. Most of us that is use the term the Russian Empire, and you know, that I think it's a definitely correct term, even if quite vague.
you know, I like that because I did so a while ago. I was doing some research. I made a video about kind of what happened on the so-called pro-Russian separatist social media, you know, chatter around 2013 and 2014, around my time, like before and after into
Yeah.
that spring. And a lot of the propaganda that I saw coming out from you know, some of the leaders of that, like Pavel Gubarev, or the militias, you know, Novorossiya militia, or DPR, things like that. A lot of that propaganda made a direct timeline, you know, or a direct connection by images or words of, you know, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation, right? And
Mm,
it kind of combined all of them into this Russian chauvinism, and this kind of nationalism, for propaganda. And you know, I think that probably would make sense to people in the region. It doesn't make a lot of sense to people in the West, um, and it's because obvious. Well, it's not obvious, but in history, or even, you know, reading communist literature, there's a distinct, you know, dividing lines. You know, that the Bolshevik Revolution has nothing to do with the Russian Empire. It was in contrast to that, and that it
mm,
was this new beginning, and that the Russian Federation in many ways has nothing. It's a capitalist, you know, society that came out after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That these things are very separate, you know, and people can kind of compartmentalize them. And then more recently, with you know, Putin's actions of territorial expansion, some of that nostalgia has kind of creeped in even into the West with the Soviet Union through, you know, propaganda or what have you. But you know, just that the idea that instead of looking at these as separate phases, but as just, it's just empire, you know, regardless of when it's happening, almost regardless of even the country. It's just this idea of territorial expansion and imperialism, right? That's happening.
absolutely. It never
Yeah,
stopped being imperialist, and it never stopped being an empire.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you know, you're right in that, um, especially in the left, the Soviet Union, I really do think for a long time was, you know, never portrayed as being an empire, right? Which which kind of seemed crazy, especially from an Eastern European perspective, right?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. But that's also why, you know, I like that. This is also why I'm searching to speak, you know, with people like you, so that folks
Yeah.
who might not normally have that perspective, you know, can hear that perspective, right?
Yep. Yep. Now, I mean, you know, I can definitely tell you that living in the shadow of Russian Empire was a very real thing, and the Russian imperialism was very real. And if you live in a country that, you know, every time your government makes some choice that Russia might dislike, to an extent that you're going to have tanks rolling in, as happened in 56 in Hungary, as happened in 68 in Czechoslovakia, 56 in East Germany, and so on and so on, then is it not imperialism if
Right.
every decision your supposedly independent country is making can have a consequence of your big neighbor rolling with the tanks in, you know?
Right. Right. And that kind of, what I also don't hear much of anything about, except a little bit, but it's really, niche kind of social media, and largely from what I found incorrect, or at least laden with propaganda, is discussion of what's actually happening in the DPR, or in Luhansk, the LPR, about
Mm.
what those governments since 2014 are actually about, and how, society is functioning since 2014, when Russian separatists, PMCs, paramilitaries kind of rolled in and took over power. You don't really hear a lot about the functioning or non-functioning of the governments in those areas either, at least from my observation in the West. I don't know.
Well, that's part part of the reason is that the information out of there is actually really tightly controlled,
Right.
and majority of the people that would be against it for whatever reasons are either in exile, ran away a long time ago, or they're dead.
Yeah.
So there just aren't that many people that are willing to be writing about what's going on there now. So we don't know we don't know a lot of the stuff that is happening. I think that's the best description. We have published some interviews with anarchist comrades from there that had to run away, or there was an interview even with someone that was still living there just prior to war. So yeah, there is some stuff coming out of there, but yeah, there isn't that much information available, really.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, reliable information.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's it's a whole separate conversation, I suppose.
Whatever, like the things we can hear from there are definitely really bad. So if you have a bit of intelligence, you can piece some stuff together and
Yeah.
kind of get a rough idea how things look like.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's speaking about that, because it's almost, I don't even want to go, because I have other things I can think of, but we'll be here for hours talking about it. But there is a lot on your site, and there are things that I don't even know about yet. Just right before we hopped on, I was reading an article about the group RKAS, for instance. But
Oh yeah.
are you aware of anarchist or anti-fascist groups or actions in the region, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, even Poland or Finland, etc., that you would like to talk about, or that people in the U.S. who don't know might want to know about?
I mean, this is a very broad subject, that we
It
could be
is.
talking about, and obviously, Ukraine is completely different from Poland, for example, especially now that there is the full-scale invasion going on. So I think a lot of stuff that comrades were doing there is on hold because they got more pressing concerns.
Right.
But so it's such a broad subject that I don't really know where to start. If I, but I just wanted people to know that there is actually quite thriving anti-fascist anarchist movement in all these territories.
Yeah. Maybe a good place to start would be, I'll put a link in the description to go to this section, and start reading these articles, because then you read the articles and you hear people's names, you hear organizations' names, and you can search those up, and kind of link from there. Kind of
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. On that same idea, I think that I got to 16. I don't even remember. I think I got to 161 crew by looking researching anarchists that travel to Ukraine to fight. I was interested in that in the international, group of the Ukrainian military, and I came across the name Cooper Andrews, and that got me
Mm,
to Tom from the Rhizome House, who I just spoke with, and of course Cooper Andrews is from the United States, and he traveled and he was killed in combat in Ukraine, and um, they're doing a whole commemoration for him and using some funds to kind of build onto their info shop. I think Solidarity Collectives might be involved in that a little bit too. But on the site for 161 crew, there were some names. For instance, one that's kind of prominent right now on the site's Dmitry Petrov.
mm.
Are there, individuals like Dmitry, for instance, or other folks that, again, people in the West might want to know about or hear about?
Yeah, I mean, not not all the comrades that went there and died in combat had a great kind of theoretical input into the struggle, but Dmitry Petrov definitely was one of them. He actually was a very influential person in the anarchist movement in that part of the world, and actually left quite a lot of writings um, behind. And I think Crime Think published like a pamphlet or a zine that you can download from their media with his collected writings, and I would very much encourage people to you know get to know this stuff, read it. There's some brilliant pieces of analysis and brilliant pieces of writing in there. Yeah, Dmitry Petrov, I would say, was like the main person.
Good. Maybe I'll try if I can. I'll try to find that link to the Crime Think article. If I can't, I'll just link to Dimitri's article on the 161 crew site.
Now, there's stuff available in English, definitely. I'm gonna find it for you while we talk.
Great, great. I appreciate that. Yeah, I want to read it. I haven't read it, so I want to read it too. Um, and on this talking about the site, um, right now, Ukraine and Russia is prominent, of course, because of what's happening. But it looks like 161 crew doesn't just it's not just Ukraine and Russia. For instance, I saw some global actions and events happening. There was one article about volunteers fighting Greek fires, for instance. So is 161 crew. We talked kind of about what they are, but I also wanted to kind of say it's not just Ukraine and Russia, right? There's other broader things that are focused upon.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're trying to show the information about movement worldwide and show the examples of self-organization and kind of grassroots organizing in different aspects of life. So yeah, we're especially always interested in things like people organizing themselves to solve the problems that are appearing in the communities, be it like ecological collapse, ecological climate crisis, be it like repression from the government, be it far right, be it like whatever other problems. So yeah, we try to keep Polish speaking public informed about all these things happening. So that's kind of international part of what we do is really important, because we are all connected, and we all have to, well, we all should at least try to learn from each other. So it's very important not to be just sticking in, staying in your own kind of bubble within your own country, or just within the language you speak, and trying to find out what's happening in other parts of the world, because a lot of the stuff that's happening is really inspiring as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said that because yeah, things can be doom and gloom, and especially when everything is critiquing, because it can become very negative. But on maybe a more positive, side of folks in the U.S., let's say, I do think that legitimately people do want to know these things, and I do think that maybe legitimately they don't know where to go, and
Uh,
that vacuum is filled by all those things we talked about before, like gray zone and stuff like that, where they think they're getting this great information, but they're not. And I think what you said earlier is important, because it's kind of what I went to as well, is that a good source is to go and look, who's from that country, right? And
mm,
try to find resources for people in the United States. Even Poland is not Ukraine, but the perspective that they would gain is going to be very different regardless. And so it serves a utility,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely. That definitely shout out to Crime Think for always trying
I
to
know.
find people in the region they write about, and getting interviews with people from those regions and so on, and translating everything into many languages as well. So so this way it reaches people from outside English speaking world as well. So these guys are doing a great job.
Yeah, yeah, and I know they've been doing it for a long time. I used to, when I was talking to Tom on that Rhizome House discussion, I was saying I still have old printed zines from the late '90s from them, and they've just been going hard and of course, they're banned on a lot of like Twitter, for instance, on U.S. social media. So they're of course one of the great sources you have no access to on these platforms, but they still have their website and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely encourage people to use Telegram more as well, as
Yeah,
these days a lot of good information is there, and
yeah.
it's far less censorship there than on like Twitter, X, or whatever it's called these days.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm glad you said that too. I think Telegram. I mean, Telegram is a great source. Um, it's not as widely used in the United States as it is in parts of Europe, but there's just great information. Yeah, it's much better than what you see on these sites, because and I think people are self-aware of this, but so much of it is just driven by algorithms and commercial buys and things like that. It's very hard to actually have a legitimate search on these platforms and find good authentic information. I've Telegram can be a little hard because you kind of need to know what you're looking for. um, but if you know what you're looking for and you get to it, it's the channels are very informative. And you can translate. I think there's a service fee if you want to pay that, but you can just copy and paste it into like a Word document and translate if you want to as well for free.
No, I think the translation option is free to everyone.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, pretty sure.
So yeah,
Yeah, no, he is as a matter of fact. Yeah, it should be. Yeah, it
but
should be.
yeah, you're not the first person to kind of point to Telegram as maybe a source for people to use. So I want to know about this. So there's journalism involved with this, and like you said, almost this bigger concept or larger effort, um, to have many activities happening with 161 crew. But one of them, I want to know about, what's 161 Fest. What's that?
What was that? Sorry, what?
The 161 Festival or Fest.
Oh yeah, 161 Festival. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
festival we organize annually in Poland, uh, and its aim is to bring people from the movement together, meet up, get to know each other, chat, make contacts, but also for a lot of us that already know each other to meet up. But one of the other big aspects of 161 Festival is to generate funds for the good projects that we have good campaigns, good groups, good initiatives that are around. So this is a way of the movement supporting itself, basically.
Yeah, that's great. There's that can build, a sense of community, of course, but also I suppose outreach too. Um, yeah, I was looking at it and looked like a good time. I don't know.
It's good. It's good. It's kind of we kind of raised the bar pretty high with it now in terms of like quality of the events. So kind of every year we're really struggling to keep up with it now, to make it as good as the previous one, and so on. But yeah, no, it's definitely a good time. And apart from good time, obviously it's a great support for the movement.
And talking about like resources, for instance, if folks go on to your site, so first of all, you have a zine, I believe, right, called Alerta.
Yeah. We have a paper magazine. It's in Polish, unfortunately, only. So,
So, but yeah, there's that, and a trick for that. There's I use this for I gained access to Russian government documents that were in a hack that occurred last year on a server, and many of those documents were PDFs or images because they were scanned. And there's free software out there that can translate text on image too. I've done that with zines from other countries where I don't speak the language. That can be a way around it. You just take pictures and throw them on one of these sites, and it can translate it for you.
oh well, I didn't even know something like that is possible. But there you
Yeah,
go, wonderful
yeah.
technology.
Yeah, and they're free. Of course, the first few will at the top of the search will want money, but if you go down a little bit, there's free ones.
I
Um,
mean, a lot of the stuff from the magazine appears later on our website. So
there you go.
I absolutely encourage people to check our website, and we also kind of try to publish some more stuff in English.
Mhm.
We don't have a lot of things in English, but the ones we have are, in my opinion, pretty good. And yeah, and obviously we have a Telegram channel. That's nice and easy way of getting at least cursory glance at things.
And you also have a newsletter, right?
Uh, no, not really. We
Okay.
used to have like an email newsletter and stuff like that, but we don't really do that anymore. We just basically on all social media possible, and a paper magazine.
What I did find, which I'm gonna dig into though, is like a distro, and on there, and I linked out I think to a Facebook page and
Yeah.
yeah, some others. It looks like that you have some music, some records, some merch that I want to look at some of the music, but it seems like you have some good distro stuff available.
Yeah. We do. We also like produce some merchandise in order to generate fans for again for different good projects that we find worth supporting. And we do have music. We have bands that donate some of their merchandise for us to sell as well. So yeah, this is a pretty good side project of our crew as well.
Yeah, for sure. When I want to get some records I saw on there. So
All right.
for sure, man. So so that being said, I think people have like a nice overview kind of what the group is, um, and some high level stuff, Western, westsplaining and Ukraine
Mm.
and Russia and kind of maybe European anti-fascist view of Russia versus what we talked about in the U.S. Um, some of the broader things that your group does, talking about other parts of Europe, the distro, your festival. it's really cool, man. It seems like there's a great sense of community, with all of this. But along with all of that, I don't know, is there anything else that you want to talk about with either it's a 161 crew, or just things that you individually would like to speak about, regarding anything we've said or not?
I mean, I'm surprised you didn't ask us if we support Ukrainian Nazis. Just kidding. But on a more serious note, well, is there anything else I would like to talk about? I mean, there is a lot of stuff we could be talking about, but also don't want to make it too long, because people's attention is a difficult thing to pay attention for something that's too long. But yeah, I would just like to say that if people got any questions about anti-fascist and anarchist movement in Poland, they can get in touch with us either via our social media like Instagram, Facebook less really. Send us a message, send us a message on Telegram and email and things like that. We'll be happy to chat to people, happy to discuss, debate. Yeah.
All right.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we missed anything. We probably did, but there's probably like another bunch of things we could be talking about. But
yeah, I think I avoided a few on purpose, but well, all right, man. Yeah, so I'll put links to the socials in the description for this. And I, probably more than anything, even though I'm trying to call out every single thing that 161 crew has available, I think for English speakers, Telegram and the website are just really great. Even if you can't do Telegram, going to the website, there's so much information. I haven't gone through it thoroughly yet. There's so much good information, even just on that Russian reader specific part of the much larger site. There's going to be a lot of information and names of people and names of organizations and events, historical events, current events that you probably haven't heard of, because in the West, these things, or at least in the United States, these things aren't discussed as much, as a lot of this more peripheral conspiratorial stuff that, like we said, people do for money, and that's why it's prominent. But I would urge folks to check out what's on 161 Crew's site, Telegram, if you'd like to chat. Nestor, man, thanks for talking, and maybe down the road, if you have other ideas, or if something pops up, I'd love to talk to you again.
Okay, yeah, thanks for having me, man. All the best.